Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to BWTM Sports and Gaming. The topic of discussion is boxing, of course, and it's Deontay Wilder, the former WBC heavyweight champion of the world. So I want to talk about the post-fight defeat to Deontay Wilder, the lockdown, and the trilogy with Tyson Fury, the third fight. These are my views, my thoughts, and before actually going to this, the first thing I did do was take a look at a recent interview that Deontay Wilder did. I think it was the first interview he did since his defeat and after the announcement he made, the one he said he was your king and all that stuff. That statement he made, that announcement he made, but after that, so I'm just going to share my thoughts. The first thing I did was I read a few titles where people were outraged by what Deontay Wilder said, and I read something somewhere that Deontay Wilder said he wasn't himself, it wasn't him in the ring that got beat that night. So I thought, you know what, before I jump to any conclusions and be one of these people, and you know them, that just read the title and they answer the question or answer the statement before watching the video or reading the article. You know, you've got people like that in the world. Yes, they do exist. I said, you know what, let me not fall foul of that and jump to conclusions. Let me hear the whole interview in its entirety. And as usual, some people jump the gun, some people are exaggerated, and there are people there that just hate because they don't like themselves. So let's get into this and let's talk about it. Now, as you may or may not know, my history of Deontay Wilder, I have to go back before we go forward, and my history of Deontay Wilder has been bittersweet. When Deontay Wilder, before Wilder had fought Stiverne, and people say, oh, well, you know, Stiverne's your mate, and okay, that's beside the point. Before Deontay Wilder fought for the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the world, regardless of the title holder, before he fought for the Heavyweight Championship of the world, leading up to that, I didn't rate Deontay Wilder's opponents, and I'd seen a fight where he got knocked down by Harold Sconias, and he was down for about the count of 9. You know, and I thought, well, you know, based on Stiverne's fighting career, with the punching power he had, the way he dismantled Areola, his amateur career, where he was pretty good as an amateur. 2 notable wins in his amateur career, one against Robert Helenius and the other one against David Price. I will also add that both of those guys, David Price and Robert Helenius, were touted as the next big thing in the heavyweight division as professionals, and both names were mentioned as heir to the Klitschko's. Deny all you want, that is a fact. And if we go back in time and look at videos, the Nordic Nightmare was knocking people out left, right and centre, just like David Price was, before he got before Price unravelled before our very eyes against the experienced Tony Thompson, who had given Vladimir Klitschko a tough night's work in both fights and was ranked number 1 in the world. Tony Thompson. Deontay Wilder fought Bermane Stiverne, who fought Chris Areola twice, and there were a lot of people out there that thought Chris Areola was going to become a heavyweight champion of the world. In both, in the 2 fights, they thought that he would beat Stiverne. They didn't think he'd beat Stiverne. They didn't think Stiverne would win that fight. And also, to add with Areola, a lot of people were on the Areola train when Areola fought Klitschko. People have got a short memory. So Stiverne at the time was highly rated. He was WBC champion of the world. We can talk about what happened with him against Wilder and subsequently Joe Joyce. But at the time, when we talk at that time, Stiverne was a dangerous contender. And nobody was rushing to fight Bermane Stiverne. Okay? That's how it was back then. But people will argue me until they're blue in the face and whatever. Let's move on. Deontay Wilder at the time, you know, there were questions about him getting knocked out in sparring and all the rest of it. And obviously, we had the interview here. We were the ones that broke the story back in 2013 of how Klitschko dropped Deontay Wilder in sparring. In that same camp was Richard Towers. In that camp also was Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua. You can listen to the interview in full with James Ali Bashir. We also talked about how he had to break up Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte because of their disagreement. Lots of stuff in that interview. It's about a 2-hour long interview. So check that out. That's on BWTM Online, not BWTM Sports. That's the original channel. That started off in 2009. The interview was done in 2013, around January, February 2013. So check that out when you get a chance. So we have to go. I think we have to go back before we come forward. I think before I talk about Deontay Wilder, there's a few other side notes I want to mention. There are people who appreciate the sport of boxing, the historical value of the sport. You know, the champions have come of old, who had got knocked out, who'd come back from adversity and came back to be champion. People have been locked up. People have been in car crashes or motorbike accidents. People have been imprisoned. People have just had a bad spell in life, and boxing has been their breakthrough. They may have had a poor start to their career, lost fights when they should have won them, had setbacks and still gone on to be champion and made a name for themselves and done well for themselves. The history of boxing. There's always been corruption in the sport of boxing. There's always been underhanded tactics and controversies and suspicious actions of questionable decisions and questionable people within the sport. It has been there then, it is there now, and it will be there in the future. So, if we look back in history, there have been some questionable decisions. It is not a fantasy to hear someone's been drugged. It's not a fantasy to suggest that somebody's hands has been plastered with has worn a cast in their glove. It's not a fantasy to suggest that rings have been fixed to suit the style of the champion, i.e. the champion may have been preparing in a certain way, so he might have been preparing on more bouncier material, and so when the opponent he fights has been fighting on flat surface, when he fights on a bouncy material now, his legs he cannot get the footing from beneath him, and therefore it saps energy out of his legs, and the person who's normally very mobile around the ring suddenly is moving around like they're in quicksand, and their mobility is taken away from them, and therefore they're an easy target to hit and get knocked out. No names being mentioned there. So I do want to mention things like that. I think it's important to talk about things like this, because for some reason in boxing, an incident can happen in one point in time and it be acceptable, but in another point in time it's not acceptable, or it can't happen, and it's fantasy. For example, a man at 5'11" and 15.5 stone, and at 5'9" or 5'10", it's impossible that he can fight and beat guys who are 6'5", 6'6". He's not big enough. He's not light. He's too light. Blah 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 blah. Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, guys coming up from middleweight going up to heavyweight and fighting, but yet we still get people say he's not big enough. That these guys are genuine heavyweights. So it still baffles me how these things happen. I'm only saying this from a historical perspective before I get into this Wilder thing, and so you can see where I'm going with this. So Deontay Wilder, he fights Tyson Fury in the rematch. I felt he was going to, based on what I saw of Tyson Fury, I thought he was going to dismantle Tyson Fury. He made it quite clear. In the commentary I did for the fight, from very early on in the fight, in the first round, I said Deontay Wilder does not look right. Off the back foot, he looks very uncomfortable, and there's something wrong with his back leg. Called it from round one. Okay? This is taking nothing away from Tyson Fury's performance. As I said before, that's the best I've seen Tyson Fury box throughout all of his career. Yeah, he looked a polished fighter. He looked a man on a mission, and he looked brilliant on the night. Now, Deontay Wilder, as far as I've looked, he's never looked great on the back foot. But I've always seen Deontay Wilder as an opportunist. And with that right hand, he has learnt a way of how to get his fighters in position to land that lethal right hand and knock opponents out. Fury and his team worked out, if they backed Deontay Wilder up, as I've mentioned in previous videos, to nullify the power of Wilder off the back foot, not letting him, allow him to generate from the long levers, that big right hand. You have a way of beating him. That was one way of beating Deontay Wilder. Take the fight to him, push him onto the back foot. So tactically, Fury got it spot on. Wilder lost the fight. Fury won the fight in impressive fashion. And I said, at the end of the fight, I said to James Ali Bashir, Uncle James, I said, I hope there will be no stories coming out about Tyson Fury and PEDs and gloves. Well, we got it all. We got PEDs, we got the farmer, we got the gloves. The Mauricio Suleiman wrote a cheeky sort of message out by the WBC, basically confirming that both guys had been clean. And he wanted to make it clear that both men were clean. And that's a great thing to know that they were both clean. So there were no other conspiracy theories about fighters not being clean. That was a positive thing and a good thing for the sport. So that was good to know. But while we're talking about this, it's not out of the equation. It's not out of the realm of impossibilities that fighters can be drugged, things can be put in their water, and people within camps can turn for money. It has been done, it can be done, and we do know that in the heavyweight division in particular, there's the Rocky Marciano record. Nah, you can call me a conspiracy theorist all you want, but the Rocky Marciano record is there, and we saw Larry Holmes gunning for that, to get that and try to beat that record, and obviously he lost on a decision. But Larry Holmes was close to breaking that record. Mike Tyson was well on his way to breaking that record too. But Mike ran into some difficulties, as did Larry Holmes. And like I said, history. There are men who've tried to get to that elusive 49-0 that Marciano holds, and it seems to have a sort of, if you want to call it a bad luck charm, or a sort of dark energy around that 49 when it comes to Marciano's record. It is something that, you know, when I was looking at Wilder getting closer to, he's 44-0, he was getting closer to 49. I'm thinking, if he gets Fury out of there, he knocks Fury out. You got Joshua, and who else is really going to be around to, you know? So, you know, you start to think, you start to wonder those things, and people start to get very uncomfortable. There are people out there that will hate regardless, and I'm going to touch on this for a second. There are people out there that will hate, or let me change this, not use the word hate, let me change the language there, not use the word hate, I'm going to use the word, they love a fighter, but don't care that much about the sport. If you listen to some of these people, and then watch them in the comment section, you'll hear them repeating what certain fighters will say, because they're a fan of that fighter, but they might not be a fan of the sport. There's a difference. A fan of the sport doesn't just focus on one fighter, but looks at the historical aspects of the sport. So it's not just one fighter or a collection of fighters. It will be an era or eras, and we'll look at the historical implications. So when I talked about Wilder's defeat, and I did a video on, and please do check that video out as well, what would I do if I managed Deontay Wilder? These were some of the things I suggested. I suggested he had a conversation with George Foreman. I suggested he also had a conversation with Thomas Hearns from the Kronk Gym. Tall, long, lanky, like Deontay Wilder. Has an atomic right hand, Thomas Hearns. And, Hearns, like Wilder, puts people to sleep. Bad man. And I said also that he should really talk to George Foreman and talk to George about the historical aspects of the sport and where he got beat by Muhammad Ali. And if you look at Muhammad Ali, and you look at how Ali was, very bashful, very boastful, but a great fighter, technically tremendous, and George Foreman, who at the time was knocking everybody out, and he had a tremendous knockout record. And I heard two stories. One story, he hit a cow on the head and killed the cow or the bull, and the other one was he fought 8 men on one night, George Foreman, or something like that, or 5 men, I don't know. But anyway, that wasn't a story. Those are two. Well, the one about the fighting the people in the ring, the guys in the ring, all in the same night. That's a true story. I saw that. I watched that. Not live, but I watched it on YouTube. But the one about the cow, I never actually confirmed that. And hopefully soon I will have somebody on the channel that will be able to confirm that for me. So stay tuned to that. But anyway, George Foreman's fight with Ali, where he got beat by Ali. He was the most feared man on the planet, his punching power. And the way he lost that fight to Ali, humiliated. It's the same way that Deontay Wilder was humiliated by Tyson Fury. George Foreman would be able to tell Wilder what it's like to be the champion of the world. He'd be able to tell Wilder what it's like to be the baddest man on the planet, knocking guys out left, right and centre, intimidating guys, putting guys to sleep, and how he'd enjoy that. But then he'd also be able to tell Wilder about what it's like to get put to sleep, or to be dropped, or to be knocked down by a guy you didn't think was much, by a guy you thought you were just going to walk straight over and run straight through, by a guy that stood up to your best punch and then hit you back, and then hurt you, and then embarrassed you in front of your own people. Yeah, that. The feeling of going back to the dressing room without your belt, and no longer the king, but now a chump. All the hangers-on that were around you, all deserting you, and now you're no longer the champ. And a lot of your fans have gone to your opponents, and now they are cheered him on, and you now are the loser. So Deontay Wilder now has to deal with that. So George Foreman, I felt, was the best person he should talk to, to talk to. I didn't say George should train him, but I said George should talk to him. In terms of training him, there were 3 people I believed that could train Deontay Wilder. Tommy Brooks, worked with Evander Holyfield and many other heavyweights. Stacey McKinley, who has worked with over 35 world champions and has worked with quite a few heavyweight champions of the world. Tony Tucker, Samuel Peter, currently working with Trevor Bryant, and many other fighter in the heavyweight factory that he's got, Stacey McKinley. And then there's James Ali Bashir, obviously knew Sugar Hill when Sugar Hill was a little boy, was Emmanuel Stewart's right-hand man, and I think the best man for the job. However, for those of you who missed it, I actually got to speak to Stacey McKinley last week, former trainer of Mike Tyson as well. And Stacey said this. He said that Deontay Wilder needs to be hypnotized. He thinks that Deontay Wilder needs to be hypnotized to have any chance of beating Tyson Fury. He says that Wilder, in his words, needs to forget about the glove, needs to forget about all the excuses, and he needs to train his mind and focus his mind 110% on Tyson Fury. I started talking to him about the old school training like Lennox Lewis and Marvin Hagler, going up into the mountains and locking himself away, no social media. And he said, well, yeah, that would be great, but today's fighters don't want to listen. Today's fighters think they know it all. Today's fighters don't want to pay attention to what the old fighters did, you know. So it's how much he's prepared to listen as well. He also talked about, he broke down in detail what he'd like to see from Deontay Wilder as a trainer. He says if Deontay Wilder fights his feet too far apart, he's going to work on defense. He did a whole breakdown of all the areas that Deontay Wilder needs to work on. But the big thing he stressed on is a hypnotist. And he said that Wilder needs hypnotizing, and he gets all of his fighters hypnotized. And he believes that's the way, that's one of the ways to beat Fury. But he's got to get his mind right first. Because he says Fury gets into the minds of all of his opponents. And he's got into the mind of Deontay Wilder. And he needs to be able to get all that rubbish out of his head about Fury and not take Fury on. But the only way you do that is to get hypnotized. So, here we have it now. That's from Stacey McKinley. I'm sure James Ali Bashir, Uncle James, has something to say about it. And when we can get a hold of him, surely he will have his opinion on it as well. I think Uncle Bashir is probably the best person for the job. But, you know, again, Stacey might want to put his hat in the ring and have an opinion on it as well. Simply because, in terms of Bashir, he, alongside Emmanuel Stewart, he was Emmanuel Stewart's right-hand man. So if Deontay Wilder and his team will listen to it, it's a no-brainer who you go to. You go to the guy that knows Kronk inside out, James Ali Bashir. Or just, you know, and has already been in camp with you when you were working with Klitschko. So it's a no-brainer you should go for James Ali Bashir. But, hey, what do I know about boxing? Anyway, let's move on. So, Wilder's in lockdown now. And, you know, he's a very successful man. You know, he's got his wife and his partner and his kids. And he's able to live the life that he wants to live. Very relaxed. He listens to it. He's a very cool, calm guy. You know, taking in nature and being a homely man and, you know, really appreciating life for the moment. Yeah, no, he's talking about catching a body and all this stuff. That side of him is when he's boxing and he's in the ring. And people need to separate that guy from the family guy. He doesn't walk around the street saying he's going to put people in body bags, and that's all the theatrics. That's all part of the persona. That's all by what sells tickets. That's what makes people tune in to see Deontay Wilder. He's got to say some outrageous, outlandish stuff. Mike Tyson did it as well. Said when he wants to throw a punch and throw an uppercut and hit it in somebody's nose and makes it run up into the brain. You know, Mike said some very outrageous things. I don't need to repeat them all, but he said more outlandish stuff than Deontay Wilder, and people are like, ooh, well, you know. Again, if you don't understand the history of boxing and you're just studying a particular fighter, you become ignorant to what's happened previously, so you don't really know where you're at or where you're going. You understand? So that's why it's good to have a history of the sport. There are many outlandish people in the sport of boxing before Deontay Wilder making his statements, and Wilder's pretty mild, to be honest. You know, remember you look at Mayorga when he was disrespecting Oscar De La Hoya's wife, and Oscar De La Hoya. You had Mayorga disrespecting Shane Mosley, disrespecting Fernando Vargas. You know, All sorts of things have happened, fracases, but anyway, aside the point. So Wilder's now talking about things. He's mentioning that all was not well. The count went fine, but all was not well before the fight. And he wouldn't go into detail as to why all was not well, but he started alluding to certain things. He wasn't right. Things weren't right. He said he had some injuries with bicep. Okay, but it didn't look like it was a bicep problem to me when I was looking at his legs. He looked uncomfortable from round one. Again, that could be psychological. Fury may well have got into the head of Deontay Wilder. And when you get into a person's head, psychologically, you do things. If somebody's got into your head, you do things, you act out of fear. So the back leg may have been a psychosemantic thing. In other words, it's something you're imagining happening. So your back leg's doing all sorts of things because you fear the guy that you're fighting. The guy's actually got to you. You've lost your nerve. You've lost your leg. So that's a theory. Nerves, as my boxing trainer used to tell me, nerves can either strengthen you. Fear can either strengthen you, make you faster, punch harder, and more alert, or it can make you paralyzed and weak and inferior. From feeling like a lion compared to feeling like a mouse trapped, a rabbit in headlights. So could it possibly be that Deontay Wilder was psychologically outgunned and psychologically outdone, and he was no longer able to intimidate Tyson Fury, and finally in his career he met somebody who wasn't standing for his nonsense, who wasn't standing for what he had to say, and was looking him dead in the eye and said, "Tonight, mate, you're getting it." Was it that? According to Deontay Wilder, he's like, "Well, no, I expected Fury to come at me. I have no problems with that." Or B, was Deontay Wilder drugged? Now look, I has always had some theories about what happened to Stavern the night he fought Wilder for the heavyweight championship of the world. Going back again in history, Larry Holmes coming to I think it was the end of the first, was the end of the second round. He said that Bermane Stavern was dehydrated in around the second or the third round of their fight. Dehydrated. Now, WBC heavyweight champion was dehydrated. Who's ever heard of a heavyweight champion being dehydrated? It's not the norm to be dehydrated. And Larry Holmes saw all the signs of dehydration. And at the time, the reason how I knew that is because I was on the Mike Mittman show with Steve Mittman. It was a show I would do on a weekly basis in their show over in Philadelphia. It was a weekly show that I would be a guest on. And Larry Holmes was also a regular resident on the co-host on the show. So Larry Holmes told Mike Mittman about the story of when he saw Bermane Stavern against Deontay Wilder. He said he was dehydrated, and he told Don King, and Don King went and tapped Stavern's corner. So there was a problem there. And then Wilder was saying things like he'd beat Stavern from an inch from his life. And of course, Stavern, people may or may not know, was in hospital, and when he was urinating brown. So, I mean, that's not right. I mean, something went amiss that night. And he said he didn't feel the way, he never felt right that night. And now, funny enough, Mr. Deontay Wilder now is talking about not feeling himself that night. Boxing is corrupt as corrupt can be. And the powers that be can get involved. And there's no reason why they wouldn't get involved. Of course, now Fury is the face of the heavyweight division. Also bear in mind, again, historically speaking, there's always been a non-white or a non-black a white person who's always been, and this is not a race card I'm pulling here before you get there or go there, or you politically correct idiots start popping up on the screen. All it is that I'm saying historically there's always been a great white hope. You had Jerry Cooney, you had Brian London, Henry Cooper, Tommy Morrison. You've always had a great white hope. In this particular era, the great white hope has been Tyson Fury. So for political reasons and political agenda, it's not far-fetching to believe that, hey, you pay a man enough money within Wilder's camp to slip something in the water before he drinks the water, before he goes out to fight. You know, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm saying that it's not beyond the realms of impossibility. Because it's impossible, it couldn't happen. Well, just look back in history. Things have happened in the sport. People have had stuff put on gloves and that rubs in fighters' eyes, and then the fighter can't see what they're doing. Ali most famously talked about unable to see properly through a fight where his eyes were burning him. People's gloves have been slit. People have come to fight with their cast, with things inside their gloves. All manner of nonsense has happened within boxing. Okay? So, we know controversial judging, refereeing. Boxing is a corrupt sport, believe you me. And if it's your time in the boxing world, and the powers that be say tonight you're losing, tonight you are losing. Tonight you're losing. So that's just the way it goes. I have lost all faith in believing in boxing. It's about two men that get in the ring and have a fight. Now I've lost all hope in that. To the unknowing, untrained eye, we'll say two guys that get in the ring will fight who the best fighter in the world is. Oh no. There's A side and B side. We can thank Floyd Mayweather for A side and B side. But there was always an A side and B side. It was just the red corner and the blue corner, which was two rival gangs. Historical. Okay? So, before there was Floyd's A and B, there was the red corner and the blue corner. Okay? So just think about that for a second. Just for a second, think about it. One gang from one end of the world, another gang from another end of the world. One representing the red corner, one representing the blue corner. One had one fighter from red, one guy represented from one gang, or one other guy represented from another guy from the other gang, and the two guys would fight and they'd bet on it. Boxing. There you go. Some guys were paid to take a dive. Some guys were paid to fall over in certain rounds. They'd get paid more. Yeah. Some guys didn't go to the script and upset the apple cart, and they paid for it later on in their careers, you know. All sorts of ways. Listen, the sport is corrupt. Deontay Wilder himself said it. It's a corrupt sport. And he talked about snakes in the grass. And he had to find it for himself, the snakes in his grass. So lots of things have been happening. I tell you what advantage Tyson Fury had over Deontay Wilder. He had time away from the ring to think about it. So Fury had his lockdown moment when he was abusing his body and going through his difficulties. Wilder didn't have that. Not even Joshua's had that. Wilder has a prime opportunity now. See, he's not training at the moment, so he's healing up from the bicep injury. So this lockdown is a blessing in disguise for Mr. Wilder. And if he gets the right team together, and he listens, and he gets the right trainer in, and it's crucial he gets the right trainer in, who knows how Tyson Fury will come back after the lockdown, whether he will still be as dedicated as he once was before. Have we lost? Are we going to see more of the same Tyson Fury when he comes back? I don't know. But you know what? You can't bet against the furious one. He certainly has shown himself to be, for me, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He's won all the belts in boxing. Yeah, you want to see him against Joshua just for the sake of saying, yeah, he is number one. But look, not too long ago, I was saying that Deontay Wilder is the most destructive puncher in current heavyweight boxing. I still stand by that. And you don't become a bad fighter overnight. He was flawed, yes. And they were able to make the adjustments, Fury's team, where if Wilder came in, it seemed exactly the same, but heavier. So was he heavier because he didn't train as much, or his training camp was okay? Did he deliberately come in as heavy as he did, or was that due to an injury? These questions you've got to ask yourself. Somebody did mention a point the other day as well. He said, when Wilder's been that heavy, he's looked sluggish. Well, maybe the person's got a point on that as well. I don't know. It's just things to think about. Now the trilogy. People are saying, he shouldn't fight for the trilogy. Look, I didn't think Anthony Joshua should have gone and had an immediate rematch with Andy Ruiz. Well, what a bad decision that was by me. He's now the unified heavyweight champion of the world, sitting down and locked down with those belts. What would happen if Joshua had listened to our advice? Here we are again, advising another former heavyweight champion of the world to take it easy. Step aside. And then he says, you know what? Why am I going to step aside? Why am I doing that for? I'm a champion. I'm a warrior. We criticize fighters for not fighting the best. And then when they fight the best, we criticize them for being delusional. Well, no, I don't know about all that. I mean, the fact that he wanted to fight Fury, not once, not twice, but 3 times, gives us 3 great fights. What about congratulating the man for showing heart and guts and determination of getting straight back in the ring of a guy who kicked his ass? What about that? What about that champion's heart? Yeah, a guy that's broken doesn't come out and say statements like that. So, full credit for Deontay Wilder wanting to come back. But there's no point, listen Deontay, there's no point coming back to do the same old crap again. Because you'll get beat up and knocked out again. And this time it will be the end of you. So I think you really need to make changes. You've got to make changes. It's essential that you make changes to your team, which I hear you already have done. And when you talk about him himself not being in there, you can well believe it. Why would he lie? People say, "Oh, Wilder's deluded." I think every fighter in boxing has got some form of delusion, because they have to. I mean, from the outside, you believe you can beat this person. When Roy Jones said, "Oh, I'm going to go up to heavyweight, become heavyweight champion of the world," and he was down fighting at middleweight, and he said he wanted to be heavyweight champion of the world. People look at Roy, you become heavyweight champion? Don't be silly. Man goes on and becomes heavyweight champion of the world. When Roy made those statements about wanting to become heavyweight champion of the world, people said Roy was deluded. Deluded. If you saw a picture of Tyson Fury when he punched, remember that video he used to when he uppercut himself and hit himself in the face? If I told you that guy's going to go and become world heavyweight champion, and he said he can be world heavyweight champion, people look around and say, don't be silly. He became heavyweight champion of the world. If I told you Valuev was going to become, Nikolai Valuev was going to become heavyweight champion of the world, based on his boxing ability, you wouldn't believe me. But he's heavyweight champion. He became heavyweight champion of the world. Michael Moorer, the light heavyweight, moved up, knocked out a guy who's 7'1", Mike the Giant White. For those people who love to talk about height and weight and don't understand the history of the sport, Mike the Giant White, 7'1", versus Michael Moorer, 6'1". He hit him with a combination, knocked him out flat. Beautiful. So, my closing statements are this. Joshua came back after getting beat by Andy Ruiz and regained the title. Tyson Fury came back after 2 years, a layoff, abusing his body, and came back to shock the world and beat Deontay Wilder. Now it just might be Deontay Wilder's turn to come back and shock the world and become WBC heavyweight champion of the world again. Is it too soon to write him off? Quite possibly. Let me know what you think. This has been BWTM Sports and Gaming. It's great to be back. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button, subscribe and share the video. And check us out, www.bwtmonline.com. Thanks again.